The Vollmer building, built by J.P. Vollmer in 1883 at the intersection of 5th and Main, is one of the oldest structures in downtown Lewiston. The building has been the backdrop to some of Lewiston's most colorful events and characters, including bandits, Chinese laborers, steamboat captains, miners, and the building's millionaire patron. Hi, my name's Gary Bush, and I'm going to be your host for the next few minutes as we explore some of the amazing historical sites of Lewiston, sites that you can still see today from this corner. Try to imagine a large band of Nez Perce Indians riding through this area in full war regalia. That may seem improbable now, but in 1877, when the Nez Perce Indian War was heating up, that possibility seemed very real to the people of Lewiston. In 1877, Lewiston had not been a town very long. In fact, the city had only been surveyed 3 years earlier. But white settlers had come to colonize at this confluence as far back as 1861. Their prospect, gold. In 1863, the government negotiated a treaty with the Nez Perce, one that excluded Lewiston, among a good number of other places, from the reservation. As with many treaties the United States government imposed on tribes, not all of the Nez Perce leaders agreed to the terms. It was a situation that ultimately led to war.
There were some chiefs who did not agree with this treaty, like Joseph, Whitebird, Looking Glass. They were very much opposed to this treaty, and so they refused to sign this agreement. They called it a thief or a steal treaty, and that made them become the non-treaty Indians. Now, when this treaty was signed, it allowed Lewiston to get out of the tent city situation. It now could have permanent settlement, permanent structures. There were lots of tensions between the Nez Perce and the whites. So Lewiston decided they needed to do something. So in June of 1877, the Lewiston City Council got together, and they had a special meeting to consider what to do about these increasing tensions between the whites and the Indians. And so the mayor was authorized to send a telegram to Portland, and he asked for arms and for ammunition, and they got a very quick response from Portland in the form of 40 York rifles and all the ammunition that they would need. Now then, the council had to decide where to place people in places so that they could spot quickly if there was any problem. And one of the places they put them was on the top of 5th Street grade at Pioneer Park.
The council also decided that a series of rifle pits be dug in defense against the Nez Perce. Amazingly, these rifle pits can still be seen 125 years later. Not a bad view from up here. This high ground was the best defensive position overlooking what was the eastern edge of Lewiston's downtown core. In fact, the only way to reach this vantage point was to risk the steep incline of what is now the 5th Street grade. Even after the surrender of Chief Joseph, the citizens of Lewiston didn't have far to look for someone to fear. During those boom and bust mining days, millions of dollars in gold dust passed through the port of Lewiston, and nothing attracts thieves and robbers like money. This road was not much more than a ditch carved up the side of a rather difficult hill, a perfect place for bandits to hold up wagons coming in and out town. In fact, it happened so regularly that one photographer staged a recreation. Gold attracted more than white miners. The number of Chinese immigrants doing work in mining and trading operations skyrocketed in early Idaho towns. Sometimes in places like Pierce, the number of Chinese surpassed the white population by as many as 3 to 1. Lewiston's own Little China existed near the confluence on C and D streets and later shifted down as far as 5th Street. Lewiston was as much a melting pot as any western town, but no man travels far from home without bringing with them their customs, traditions, and beliefs.
Lewiston, for example, was a big supplier to the mines. Well, when the mining played out and the Caucasian miners moved on, it was the fact that the Chinese had bought the mining claims and were running them, and they needed the supplies and stuff that the Lewiston community could still provide, and services that the Caucasian community needed and valued. Like they were cooks in private homes, restaurants, and that kind of thing. They took care of people's children. There were many Chinese laundries in Lewiston. The Chinese built a water ditch. The ditch started up by where the potlatch plant is. And, so it came from there. It was about 4 miles or so into power a mill and that kind of thing, right near the Snake River. There were temples in Lewiston from very early times, and they bought some land. And this is where the Lewiston Tribune building is now. And so they had a temple that was there from the 1880s until the late 1950s. And they raised money for it, and in one of the rooms in the exhibit, you can see these 4 donor boards where they have the names of the people that donated the money to help build the temple. Gordon Lee spearheaded a movement to donate the altar and the associated temple artifacts to Lewis Clark State College so that they could be housed in the Lewis Clark Center for Arts and History. Things like the opium pipe that's in the exhibit, that would have come from China, and then the opium pipe bowls, there'd be a lamp and the other things that people use to smoke opium. Opium, which many people don't know, but opium came in cans. They're about this high and this square, kind of like a big spice can. Many people see the little bottles in the exhibit and think those are opium bottles, but they aren't. They had medicine in them. And each little bottle had 1 dose of medicine. So you'd take the whole thing, and it had pills or powder or liquid or oils. The legacy of the Chinese in Lewiston involves the contributions that they made both economically and culturally to the community. By the 1920s, and at least, they were being talked about as being respected in the community. As you look around Lewiston, you can still see, and in the wider area, manifestations of their presence as another cultural component of the community, which is not totally European American.
Longtime residents of Lewiston likely remember Ing's restaurant. What they probably don't know is that the business owner and namesake of that restaurant, Ted Loy Ing, worked for Lewiston's first millionaire in 1896 as a houseboy and cook. After the gold rush played out, agriculture became big business. Irrigation canals were dug, and settlers in the Lewiston orchards began to grow produce, while grains were harvested in the outlying areas. Vollmer was by all accounts an enterprising man and learned his lesson well from the monopoly barons such as Carnegie and Vanderbilt. He knew there was wealth in rail lines.
The first train came in 1898. For years they tried to get a railroad in here, and he fought for it. Well, they got it as far as Genesee, and then realized, how do you get over the Lewiston Hill? There's the problem. You drop 2,000 feet. Finally, he had to get the spur to come down through Kendrick and around and down the Clearwater River. That's how it came in. And Vollmer's name crops up everywhere. People talk about the old Vollmer building. It's the Arts and Cultural Center here. He brought the first bank here. There were no banks here in Lewiston until the 1880s when he formed the first bank. The Arts and Cultural Center was designed and built by Kirtland Cutter, the famous architect. So it was a big name. It was a very prestigious building. Has had a long and storied career as a bank and historical center. It's on the Register of National Historical Places. Vollmer was very young, very ambitious, very, very ambitious young man, and got involved in a lot of things. He was on the Lewiston School Board, later became a member of the Board of Trustees of this very college, Lewis Clark State College, which was Lewiston State Normal at the time. In 1874, 27 years old, he brings the first telegraph to northern Idaho. Then he takes off in 1877 to go to San Francisco. Now, in 1876 and 1877 was the centennial of the United States. So a lot of things were being demonstrated, one of which was Alexander Graham Bell, the telephone. He sees it, takes an instant liking to it, and in May of 1878 makes the first telephone call in the Pacific Northwest from his home on Snake River Avenue to his business at 4th and Main. John Vollmer brought the first automobile to Lewiston. He became very enamored with electric cars, and so bought a 1912 Baker 5, which is a little electric car. It was very high ceiling because he liked to wear big hats. So it looks kind of odd. It's just a small electric car. He bought it, he would tool around town in it, and people would see him because he was getting old and he didn't want to walk everywhere. Well, when he died, the car was just basically put up on blocks in the carriage house of the home, and nothing was done with it. In the 1950s, when the house was torn down, a gentleman in Clarkson bought the car and restored it to working order. And then he sold it out of the community, and it passed through a couple of hands until Andy Griffith, Andy Griffith Show fame, bought the car and restored it, and then in the early 1980s, donated it to the National Car Museum in Reno. So when people go there and go to the museum and go into the pre-World War I and see this little black Baker 1912 electric car, they are seeing the same car that John Vollmer used to drive down Main Street in Lewiston, Idaho.
These are the stairs that the city of Lewiston built for the public, which just happened to lead directly to the Vollmer mansion. The mansion was demolished in the 1950s after falling into disrepair, and has since been replaced with apartments.
There was a great flood in 1894, just flooded Lewiston out completely. There were some places there were 4 feet of water in some businesses. But when they began moving up here, they built their house in 1900, a lot of other families realized this was a good place to move. His house, of course, was the largest by far. I mean, it really stood out. It was a very large white home. You drive up 5th Street grade, you're constantly reminded of the mansion that sat at the top of the grade on 1st Avenue. So his legacy is pretty strong in this community.
The Vollmer building at 5th and Main is one of the few left in Lewiston built before the turn of the century. It shows up in postcards and parade photographs, personal photo albums, and newspaper stories. And like all good backdrops, the story told in front of it is fascinating. As you walk around downtown Lewiston, keep your eyes open for some of these places that we visited. And remember, every corner has a river of history. And some of these nuggets of stories are easier to see than others. I'm Gary Bush. Thank you for watching.